Now let's take the standards. What are the standards that we're concerned with? Because we want students to assess with respect to all the standards. So we want students to assess their clarity of thought in learning the content, the accuracy of their thought in learning the content, how precisely they understand what they're understanding, the relevance of their thought with respect to some problem or question or issue, the depth of their thought, the breadth of their thought, the logicalness of their thought. And each of these is correlated with specific teaching strategies which translate out into ways of assessment. I've already mentioned for clarity. State the idea, elaborate the idea, illustrate the idea, exemplify the idea. Okay, Jack, did you understand what Jill just said? Yes. State what she said and elaborate on it. Okay, now give us an example. Oh, I can't do that. And you don't fully understand what she said. You partially understand what she said, but not completely, not perfectly clearly. Judy, would you give us an example of what you meant? Well, I'm not sure I can. And I'm not sure you understand what you're saying, because you can't connect it to your life. And that's a level of understanding, a level of clarity that we're aiming at, that we're seeking to develop. What about accuracy? There are specific questions we can ask. How can we check this? How can we find out whether this is true? Do we need to run a test? Do we need to go to the encyclopedia? How can we find out whether this is accurate? So we teach the students how to ask questions that are connected with utilizing these standards, and then we put them into activities where they do have to do this with respect to each other. Or maybe we put them into a group where one of them is checking for clarity, one of them is checking for accuracy, one is checking for precision, and so forth. We could do it that way. Or we could, for the first week, focus on clarity and not worry about anything else, then move to accuracy. I mean, there are many different ways that you can do this, and I don't really care out of the 10,000 or 200,000 ways which you use, but only that they be ways in which the student is progressively assessing the thinking they're doing. So take the example, take the dimension of depth of thinking for a moment. 3 questions that we would raise if we're checking for depth, they would be, what makes this question a complex question? Or what difficulties do we have to deal with in this question? For example, suppose you were in a social studies class and the question is, what are the roots of the drug problem in this country, and what can we do to deal with the problem of illegal drugs, lowering the quality of life and leading to death and pain and suffering of people who are taking illegal drugs and people who are innocent victims of this? Okay, so it's a significant problem. And somebody says, well, actually, I don't think it's all that difficult. Just say no. There's your answer. Now, is the answer clear? Yes. I know what it is to say no. Is the answer accurate? Yes. If everyone offered illegal drugs said no, we wouldn't have a drug problem. Is it relevant? Yes. If we can get everyone offered illegal drugs to say no. Is it deep? No. It's superficial. Why? It deals with no complexity whatsoever. Doesn't deal with the history of the problem, doesn't deal with the politics of the problem, doesn't deal with the sociology of the problem, doesn't deal with the psychology of the problem, doesn't deal with the relationship of money to the problem. It's a superficial answer. So it passes some standards, but it doesn't pass the standard of depth. So now we might say, each of you is going to write a paper on the drug problem and deal with at least one of its complexities. Its history, its psychology, money, and so forth, and you discuss what those complexities are. And then when you have your paper ready tomorrow or whenever, we're going to put you in groups, and the groups are going to assess your paper for how deep your paper was and how superficial your paper was. Well, then students are going to start becoming sensitive to that. You can bring in, you could write 2 papers, one that is superficial and one that is deep, and present it. And that would be modeling the thinking you wanted. So each of these universal standards, each of these elements, become part of the basis for getting students to assess their own work and the work of others. And what we do then is, what we have to do is think of our content as thinking, formulate organizing ideas, review the various structures that are essential to thinking, and then design episodes that require thinking in the classroom. And we have 2 criteria for those. Do the structures enable the students to carry their thinking, their habits of learning, to other classes? In other words, here's one criterion I have. If I teach my class in the way that I'm talking about, can they learn in other classes more easily because of the way I taught them in my class? So if I'm teaching well, and they leave my class and they go to your class, they should learn better in your class because of the way I'm teaching. That's one criterion I have. The second criterion, are they able to function better in their life because of the way I'm teaching my content? So that they take the way they're learning and it affects the way they learn in everyday life. Those are my 2 criteria. Why? Because if you're learning to be a learner, you should be becoming a better learner as a result. You should be developing as a learner through all learning experiences. And secondly, if you're developing as a learner, truly, your learning isn't limited just to one dimension of your life. And if you learn something that's valuable for learning, you wouldn't just apply it in one area unless you didn't see its application someplace else. So what it means is that we have to think about our own thinking to see if in the way we're doing our thinking as we model this for the students, do they see us making connections to other subjects? Do they see us making connections to life? So remember historical thinking? It's really easy to make connections to life with historical thinking because there's all this historical thinking around us. But there's also economic thinking. There's literary thinking, imaginative thinking, fantasy. There's also dramatic thinking, impersonation. Think of the way we impersonate, the way we dramatize. I mean, everyone alive is a magnificent actor or actress who should win an Academy Award for their life because you're acting the role perfectly. You're impersonating. It's just that when we ask you to do this on stage, you can't do it anymore. And the only difference between your acting ability and a professional actor or actress is they can act on the stage as if they weren't on the stage. But you can only act when you're not on the stage. And that's what makes you not an actor. But you both impersonate. You impersonate your mother, you impersonate your father, you impersonate in your peer group. That's how you learn. It's called mimesis, copying, imitating, following a model, playing a role. And that, of course, leads into sociological thinking as you figure out how the roles that we play. When you first started teaching, didn't you sort of have the idea that somebody would grab you by the ear and say, you're not a teacher, you're a student, sit down? Because when you're first playing that role, it's hard to believe that you're actually in that role. I remember when I was first teaching at the high school level and I went to a parent-teachers meeting, parents sat down next to me and said, and what grade are you in? Are you a sophomore? And I said, no. She said, are you a junior? I said, no. And she said, are you a senior? And I said, no, I'm teaching here. And then for the rest of the night, she apologized. But I remember also the feeling that the other students are not going to believe that I'm really a teacher. So entering that role and impersonating it was part of the problem. So this is acting, this is dramatics, and we all engage in it.